So you've been learning a language for a while, could be years, right? You've really put the work in. You can, get by, order your coffee, maybe even handle some work stuff. You feel like you've got a handle on what you need to say.
Yeah, that feeling of competence in specific situations.
But then the frustrating part hits. You overhear native speakers just chatting naturally, or you try to watch a movie, listen to the radio.
It's like whoosh
Yeah,
over your head.
exactly. It feels like a completely different language sometimes. That wall you hit, even though you feel like you can speak okay.
That wall is incredibly common. So many learners experience it. And it's really the problem that Dr. Lyman Campbell tackles in his work.
Right, his idea about becoming someone to whom host people can talk.
Precisely. It flips the focus, doesn't it? It's not just about your speaking, but about whether they can speak naturally to you and actually be understood.
And that's exactly what we're going deep on today. We're really unpacking Dr. Campbell's take on why understanding, comprehension stays such a challenge.
Even when you think your speaking is pretty solid.
Yeah. And crucially, how he suggests we need to, maybe shift our focus completely to break through that wall.
So our mission for this deep dive is to really get into the weeds on the problems he sees with the typical speech-led way of learning.
Okay.
And then explore this alternative he puts forward, a path driven by comprehension first.
All right, let's unpack that first bit then. This speech-led learning. What does that actually mean day to day, and why does it lead to learners getting stuck?
Well, basically, speech-led means your main goal, your driving force, is learning the things I want to be able to say. You focus on the words and grammar you think you'll need for your specific planned interactions, for your job, your hobbies, daily tasks.
Like that example he uses. The person who wouldn't bother learning how to describe, what was it? A drop of water putting out a cigarette?
Exactly, because, why would I ever need to say that? So if your learning is totally dictated by what you plan to produce, you just miss out on huge amounts of the language people actually use.
The unexpected stuff, the stories, the description.
All the normal, everyday ways people talk. You end up building only your side of the conversation, and it's a pretty limited side.
And that narrow focus, that's what leads straight back to that wall we mentioned.
It does. It often lands people in a place the source calls Terminal 2+.
Okay, referencing the FSI scale, right? Level 2, maybe a bit more.
Yeah. So you're functional, you can manage a lot of common tasks. That's the level 2 part. Maybe a bit beyond is the plus. But you really struggle when it comes to understanding faster native speech or group chats or media.
So the learner, they can handle their basic stuff. They can say what they think they need to. Why does the growth just stop there? Why the plateau?
This is, I think, the really key insight. Because they can manage those basic things. The actual pressure to learn more speech kind of fades.
They don't feel the need to produce more complex sentences themselves.
Right. But the real roadblock is that they don't understand enough of what they hear around them. In normal, unsimplified talk, on the radio, just life happening.
So that rich language environment isn't actually input for them.
Exactly. It can't be comprehensible input. So they're basically cut off from the most powerful engine for continued language growth.
Okay, wow. So this is where Dr. Campbell's alternative comes in, and it sounds really different. Comprehension-led learning. What's the heart of that idea?
The core philosophy is that your speaking ability should grow out of your deep familiarity with how native speakers actually talk. It develops naturally from understanding.
So instead of starting with, what do I want to say?
You start with, how can I understand what they're saying? All of it.
And the goal, the vision with that approach, is it just better listening skills?
It's much bigger than that.
Yeah.
The vision is essentially continuous, maybe even indefinite language growth.
Indefinite.
Yeah, because by deliberately working towards understanding everything you hear, you tap into that huge, constant stream of language all around you. The language used by others becomes your ongoing curriculum.
That really does feel like it flips the traditional model completely on its head.
It does.
But okay, understanding fast, natural speech, it feels incredibly complicated. Dr. Campbell points out 3 big hurdles, right? Let's take the first one. The processing problem. Speed.
Yeah, the speed issue is huge. Understanding speech isn't just knowing words. Your brain has this internal understanding machine that has to process sounds, grammar, context, meaning, all at lightning speed, in real time. Building the efficiency of that machine is a major challenge.
So how do you make that machine faster? Is it just brute force, listening to tons of stuff?
It's a bit more strategic than just volume. The speed and efficiency improve through frequent use, but specifically by listening to speech, you can actually understand at your current level.
Ugh, so comprehensible input again. That's the key. But how do you get complex native speech down to a level you can understand, especially early on?
That's where intentional interaction and carefully tailored input are crucial. Early activities matter. Things like role plays, maybe using puppets, or talking about wordless picture stories.
Things with context.
Exactly. Lots of context to help you understand the language. And working closely with a teacher or a fluent speaker who can adjust how they speak to you is vital.
And Dr. Campbell actually outlines different levels of this kind of tailored input, doesn't he? Stuff you should aim to record and build into a personal listening library.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
That listening library is like the workout routine for your understanding machine. He suggests progressing through levels of difficulty.
Okay, what are they?
Level A is the easiest. Speech about things you can see happening, like total physical response TPR, where you follow commands. Or creating stories together from picture books and recording them. Lots of visual cues.
Got it. Makes sense.
Level B is a bit tougher. Using familiar content. Think of retelling a story like Goldilocks, one you already know well in your own language, but hearing it in the new language.
Using prior knowledge.
Right. You listen, review it with your teacher to make sure you got it all, then record it for your library.
Okay.
Level C is harder still, and it's a really major phase. This is speech addressed directly to you by a native speaker about their life, their culture, their experiences. He calls it deep life sharing.
Deep life sharing. That sounds intense.
It involves hundreds of hours of interaction, but it generates tons of personalized recordings for your library, and crucially, it builds relationships and cultural understanding too.
We'll come back to that cultural part, I bet. What's the next level?
Level D is the hardest. This is authentic native-to-native speech. No simplification. Think recorded radio call-in shows or just conversations between native speakers you managed to record.
Okay, the really challenging stuff.
Yeah. You take these recordings, go through them really carefully with a teacher to understand everything, then add those to your library too.
So the core strategy is use your learning time to create this library of recordings you can understand today, and listening to that library trains your brain to process faster, building the capacity for harder stuff down the road.
Precisely. That listening library is your engine for boosting processing speed.
Okay, challenge 1, speed, addressed by building a comprehensible listening library. What's the second big challenge Dr. Campbell identifies?
The second one is the vocabulary problem.
Yeah. Feels like you need millions of words.
Oh, you certainly need a lot. And it's not just the common ones. Real speech is packed with thousands of less frequent words, and you can't predict when they'll pop up. Just understanding requires a massive vocabulary base.
Right. And this is where he brings in that idea of the comprehension advantage, isn't it?
Yes, and it's such a key point. Our ability to understand a word when we hear it develops much, much faster and easier than our ability to actually use that word correctly in our own speech.
That's true even in our first language, right? We understand way more than we say.
Absolutely. But in language learning, we often put this huge pressure on ourselves to master every single new word for active use, like immediately.
Which sounds completely exhausting and probably not very effective.
It really is. And he contrasts that pressure with a more realistic model he calls the iceberg principle.
Okay, tell me about the iceberg.
So picture your whole vocabulary, everything you recognize as a giant iceberg. The little tip sticking out of the water, that's the small set of words you actively use frequently and confidently.
Your speaking vocabulary.
Exactly. But the huge part underwater, the massive base of the iceberg, that represents the thousands, maybe tens of thousands, of words you recognize and understand when you hear or read them, but don't typically use yourself, your understanding vocabulary.
And trying to force every new word we learn straight up into that tiny tip
Is fighting the nature of the iceberg. It's super inefficient. Many words you try to cram into active use will just naturally sink back down into that understanding base anyway because you don't need them often enough.
So what's the better approach, according to this principle?
The better way is to focus on having really good, strong, meaningful first encounters with new words, specifically aiming to get them firmly lodged in the bottom part of the iceberg.
Into your passive recognition vocabulary.
Yes. Make sure you understand them well when you encounter them in context.
And how do they eventually move up to the speaking tip, if needed?
They rise naturally over time if you genuinely need them for active use. Repeated encounters in different contexts, hearing them again, maybe trying to use them yourself, that brings them up.
And the listening library helps here too, I assume.
Immensely. Regularly listening to your recordings reinforces your understanding of all those words sitting lower down in the iceberg. It keeps them fresh and accessible for comprehension. You're leveraging that comprehension advantage.
Wow, that's a major mindset shift. Focus on understanding first. Trust that active use will follow for the words you truly need. Okay, so we have processing speed, vocabulary size. What's the third piece of the puzzle for deep comprehension?
The third challenge is the cultural knowledge problem.
Ah, okay. Not just words and grammar.
Not at all. Understanding speech is deeply tied to the speaker's shared cultural background, their common knowledge, their assumptions about the world.
Right. You can know all the words in a sentence, but if you miss the cultural reference.
You just won't get it. The meaning is lost.
And this links back to that deep life-sharing phase you mentioned earlier, right? The level C input.
Absolutely. Dr. Campbell suggests that a big chunk of focused learning time he throws out, maybe the middle 8 months of a 2-year intensive period, hundreds of hours should be dedicated to this.
Hundreds of hours just talking to people about their lives.
Yes, but it's not just casual chat. It's intentional. It's about building cultural understanding alongside language, asking people for their life stories, about their daily routines, their perspectives.
How does that directly build the cultural knowledge needed for comprehension?
Because as you engage deeply with people about their reality, you start to absorb the underlying values, the assumptions, the shared history, the worldview that shapes how they talk and what they talk about.
It makes the culture less of an abstract concept.
Exactly. It becomes personal, grounded in relationships. You're not just learning about the culture, you're experiencing it through people. He even mentions resources like Spradley's The Ethnographic Interview as a guide for how to have these kinds of conversations effectively.
So you build this cultural framework through personal interaction.
Right. And then when you move on later to tackling those authentic native-to-native resources, the level D stuff like radio shows or movies, maybe in the final phase of learning, you have the foundation to actually understand them much more deeply. Those resources then help refine and expand the cultural understanding you've already built.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Processing speed, vocabulary, cultural knowledge, tackling all three, with comprehension as the driving force. So bringing it all together, how does this focus on understanding connect to the bigger picture, the ultimate goal of language learning?
Well, Dr. Campbell is clear that while comprehension is absolutely foundational, the end goal isn't just technical skill. It's not just about being proficient.
It's more than that.
Yeah, it's about becoming, in his words, a growing participator in relationships in a host community.
Ah, participation, connection.
Exactly. Language skill is the means to achieve that deeper connection and integration, not the end in itself.
And he suggests that certain teaching approaches, like communicative language learning, often fit better with this view, right?
Yes, especially when done well. Approaches that see language learning as happening through authentic interaction and participation, rather than just drilling grammar rules or memorizing lists. It aligns more naturally with this goal of becoming an active participant in the community.
So this whole deep dive, it really feels like it reframes the journey, shifting from how can I say what I need to how can I understand what they're saying isn't just a tactic.
No, it's more fundamental.
It seems like a pathway to potentially unlock that continuous growth and finally get past that frustrating comprehension wall so many learners hit.
It really redefines success, doesn't it? From just expressing yourself to being able to fully engage with, learn from, and truly participate in the life of the host community through understanding their language.
It's a powerful shift. So for listeners who are hearing this and thinking, okay, this resonates, this comprehension-led idea feels right for me, where does Dr. Campbell suggest they look for more practical guidance?
Yeah, the source material points to a few options. There are online resources available. The website is equogrp.netleg.
Okay, equogrp.netleg.
Right. There's also mention of attending field-based workshops if possible, or connecting with a language learning advisor, an LLA, for more personalized support.
Good to know there are resources out there. It really leaves you, the listener, with something interesting to chew on for your own language learning, doesn't it? Think about it. How might shifting your primary focus away from just perfecting your message and instead dedicating yourself to truly deeply understanding theirs? How might that not only change how you learn the language, but maybe change the depth of your connection with a whole different culture?